Derrick Henry has become one of the best running backs in the NFL and could go down as one of the best players to ever play the position when it's all said and done. You may know him from the Titans, but do you know how he became a superstar to begin with and how he became an absolute star at Alabama? He is also widely considered the best high school running back to ever play the game, and he was just destined for greatness. Today we'll take a look back at the journey of Derrick Henry, his rise as a player, and his time in college and before he became an NFL superstar. Derrick Henry is the all-time leader in rushing yards for any high school running back ever, but how did he get to this point? It actually starts out in a suburb of Jacksonville, but sadly his father was absent for most of his childhood. He was in and out of prison close to 20 times in total, and because his mom had to work so much, Derrick spent all of his time with his grandparents, and they provided a nice family for him to live with. He felt safe and secure there, and finally got the stability he needed to become a successful person and player. This kid had all the physical tools to be a beast, and he took up the running back position when he got to high school. He ran for 2,465 yards and 26 touchdowns as a true freshman, and that was truly unbelievable. He ran more yards as a true freshman than most kids run in their entire high school football career. He didn't slow down either, as he ran for 2,788 yards and 38 scores as a sophomore, and he looked like he was playing in NCAA 14 with all the sliders turned all the way up. By this point, Derrick was a big-time recruit and actually decided to commit to Georgia. He joined his friends Bryce Ramsey, Stanley Boom Williams, and Tramel Terry, and they all committed to the Bulldogs, but that did not end up lasting. His numbers dropped by 100 yards and 2 touchdowns as a junior, but this kid was already on track to becoming the best running back in high school football history. What Derrick Henry was about to do as a senior was truly unbelievable. He ran for a state record 510 yards in one game and averaged 9.2 yards per carry as a senior. He would go on to rush for 4,261 yards and 55 touchdowns, and these were both state records, and now Henry was the best running back in high school football history. When it came to recruiting, obviously Derrick was going to be able to play at any school he wanted to, and every single coach in the country wanted his talents. His final 3 schools consisted of Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama. He ultimately wanted to be the best player he could be, make it to the NFL, play for the best coaches, and maybe win some national championships along the way, so he committed to Nick Saban and the Alabama Crimson Tide. According to 24/7 Sports, Henry was a 5-star recruit, the #1 athlete, and the 13th best player in the class of 2013. Alabama landed his steal at running back, and he would not let the program down. Derrick would come into Alabama competing with TJ Yeldon and Kenyon Drake for carries, and he would settle into his role as the 3rd back on the team. Henry did struggle his freshman year, especially in his first few games. He seemed to be overthinking things too much and wasn't running the ball as well as he could have. That was until the Arkansas game. Derrick broke out for an 80-yard touchdown and finished the game with 111 rushing yards. He followed it up with 100 yards and a touchdown against Oklahoma in the Sugar Bowl, and the Tide would end up going 11-1 during the regular season, with their only loss coming by way of Chris Davis in the kick 6. They would end up playing in the Sugar Bowl, but they lost to Oklahoma. Derrick wasn't expected to be a superstar early on, but he finished with 382 yards and 3 touchdowns as a freshman, which were very respectable numbers. Going into 2014, he was going to be splitting carries with TJ Yeldon, but he would eventually become the go-to option. He opened up the year with 113 yards and a touchdown in their thrilling Chick-fil-A kickoff win against West Virginia, and the Tide would beat Southern Miss and Florida Atlantic to start out 3-0. Against Florida, Henry would run for 111 yards and a touchdown in their blowout win. He would kind of cool off for the rest of the season, as he never rushed for more than 100 yards in a game. To this point, the Tide were led by Blake Sims, and they had beaten number 21 Texas A&M, number 1 Mississippi, number 15 Auburn, and number 16 LSU, and their only loss came to Bo Wallace and the Ole Miss Rebels, but they were headed to Atlanta and in prime position to make the inaugural college football playoff. Their opponent in the championship game was the Missouri Tigers, and of course that's when Derrick Henry decided it was his best time for him to break out. In the Tide's blowout win, Henry ran for 141 yards and 2 touchdowns and absolutely shredded Missouri's really good defense. Alabama would go on to make the college football playoff, and they lost an absolute thriller to Ezekiel Elliott's Ohio State Buckeyes, 42-35. In that game, Derrick ran for 95 yards and a touchdown, but it still wasn't enough. Henry would go on to lead the Tide in rushing in 2014 with 990 yards and 11 scores, while averaging 7.5 yards per carry. Going into 2015, Yeldon was gone, so Henry was going to be the full-time starter, but it wasn't going to be easy. Kenyon Drake was still good, Damian Harris emerged, and they brought in 5-star recruit Bo Scarborough, and this created a ton of competition. Jake Coker was the quarterback, Calvin Ridley was the star receiver, and O.J. Howard was their star player at tight end. The Tide were expected to make the playoff, and Henry was poised to break out, and that's exactly what he did. In their season opener against Wisconsin, he rushed for 147 yards and 3 touchdowns in his coming out party. He followed it up with 3 more touchdowns against Middle Tennessee and 127 yards in their weird home loss to Ole Miss. Bama would need to get themselves back together or they would potentially miss the playoff, and it's safe to say Derek took it upon himself to make that happen. He would go on an absolute tear, starting with 148 yards in the win over Georgia, 236 yards against A&M, 210 yards and 3 scores against LSU, 204 yards against Mississippi State, and 271 on the road against their arch-rival Auburn. He had carried the Tide to an 11-1 record and the SEC championship, and he was now the frontrunner to win the Heisman Trophy. He would go on to rush for 189 yards against Florida in the SEC championship game, and Bama was headed right back to the playoff. They got the 2 seed and were matched up with number 3 Michigan State in the first round, and he'd go for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns in their blowout win. Derrick Henry solidified his Heisman season with 158 yards and 3 scores in their national championship win over Clemson, and he had beaten out McCaffrey for that Heisman Trophy win. He rushed for 2,219 yards and 28 touchdowns and led his team to the title game. Derrick Henry won the Heisman, as I said, and became a consensus first-team All-American. Henry broke the SEC record for rushing yards in the season, plus will go down as the best running back in Alabama football history. So now it was time for him to go to the NFL. Despite literally doing everything imaginable, scouts were concerned about him being a workhorse back at Bama and his slow acceleration. He was still pegged to be the second best running back behind Ezekiel Elliott, and he ended up falling to the second round and was drafted to be the franchise back for the Tennessee Titans. He came into the Titans as a backup to DeMarco Murray, but he was expected to play a lot. His rookie year got off to a pretty slow start, but he eventually scored his first touchdown in Week 8 against the Jaguars. His best game of the season would come on the road against the Chiefs, where he went for 60 yards and 2 touchdowns. Henry would finish 6th amongst rookies with 490 yards and 5 touchdowns. Derek did alright his rookie year, but maybe the scouts were right. That was the question he was going to need to answer going into his second season. He had once again split carries with DeMarco Murray in 2016, and he needed to show more promise. He ran for 92 yards in a score against the Jaguars, and then had his best career game against the Colts with 131 yards and a 72-yard score. He cooled off all the way until Week 13 when he went for 109 yards and a game-winning 75-yard touchdown against the Texans. The Titans would end up getting a wild card spot in 2017, and he'd have 156 yards and a touchdown in their win over the Chiefs. They would end up losing to the Patriots the following week, but the Titans and Henry had finally begun to show promise. In his second year, he rushed for 744 yards and 5 touchdowns, but we finally saw some flash from him. Going into 2018, he was supposed to break out, but they brought in Dion Lewis to try and help manage his load. Things did not go well for Henry, and after a decent first 3 weeks, he had an abysmal stretch. In weeks 4 through 13, he only averaged 37 yards a game and never went for more than 60 yards, so what the heck was going on? Apparently Derek had been in his head, but now he was ready to restart. It all started when he took a 98-yard touchdown to the house and finished the game with 238 yards and 4 touchdowns. He would then go for 170 yards and 2 scores against the Giants and combined for 177 yards in Week 15 and 16. Because of that, he was the AFC Offensive Player of the Month, and Henry had officially saved his career. Because they did lose to the Colts, they didn't end up making the playoffs, but Henry seemingly had saved his football career. He finished the year with 1,059 yards and 12 scores, while being ranked the 99th best player in the NFL. Going into 2019, Henry was once again poised to break out, and that's exactly what he did. He ran for 1,540 yards in 2019 and had a league-leading 16 rushing touchdowns. Henry had another great year in 2020, and he is by far the best running back in the NFL according to most people. Henry was a star in high school and became the best high school running back ever. He went to the best football school in the country and took home the Heisman Trophy, and after a slow start in the NFL, he's become the best running back in the NFL. Derrick Henry could truly become one of the best players to ever play the game of football, and definitely one of the best to ever play the running back position. It's crazy how he's gotten to this point, and Derrick Henry was a lot of fun to watch in college, and for everyone who saw him in high school, they knew this kid was special. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and if you want to support Derrick Henry or the channel, be sure to give the video a like, tell me another star I should take a look at before they were good, and subscribe to the channel if you're new. If you're still here, I have videos about before they were stars for Patrick Mahomes and Alvin Kamara, so be sure to check both of those videos out, and check out my channel and all my other videos. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.